Good evening. Thanks for joining us on our weekly AJA Zoom event. My name's Robert Gregory. Also on the screen, we have Dr. David Adler, the president of the AJA, and a very special guest tonight from Israel, Rabbi Leo Dee. Also, a big special thank you to Jeff Block, who we just saw, for organizing tonight's Zoom. The format will be a short interview, followed by the chance to ask questions. If you'd like to ask a question, as always, the best way is to raise your hand with the reaction button. You can also put written questions in the chat function, and if we have a chance, we may get to some, although we usually don't have time for all the questions. Now, Rabbi Dee made Aliyah with his family from London to Efrat. In April, his life changed dramatically when his wife Lucy and daughters Maia and Rina were brutally murdered in a Palestinian Arab terrorist attack. Rabbi Dee has emerged as an inspiration, making courageous decisions, like donating his wife's organs and taking on media conglomerate CNN over its inaccurate coverage. Rabbi Dee has become a sought-after speaker, spreading a message of unity and hope for the Jewish people. Tonight's message of Jewish unity is particularly timing for the Australian Jewish community. Rabbi Dee, thank you for joining the AJA.
Thank you for the invitation.
Now, you've emerged from this tragedy as a source of wisdom. What's your message to the Jewish people, and what gives you the strength to go on?
I think, Robert, that my message to the Israeli people, which I think is a broader message, is that we have complete unity in this country, despite the impression that people get perhaps from watching the media, both in Israel and abroad. Strangely, I've been thrust into a very strange world, but I walk around the streets of Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, or Haifa or Netanya, and people come up to me in the street and give me a hug. And from that, I can conclude that religious, non-religious, left or right, everybody feels my pain, and I think the pain of everybody who is, in a situation similar to my own. And that is incredible unity. So from that, in fact, there was an Australian podcast video with Alan Dershowitz in March. So I don't know if it's one of your competitors, but in that particular podcast, Alan Dershowitz said the following. He said that in no other country in the world have people taken to the street because of legal reforms. And he said, even in America, when they had much larger reforms and Biden was going to flood the Supreme Court with his supporters, they didn't come to the streets. And in Britain, they got rid of the House of Lords powers. Nobody took the streets. The only time in history that people have taken to the street because of political, legal reforms is in Israel and in 2023. So, this side is marching with the Israeli flag, and this side's marching with the Israeli flag. This side believes they're doing it for the people and for the country, and this side for the people in the country. We've never had greater unity in terms of wanting to make a better state and a better world for Jews here in Israel. And I think that it's a reflection of the unity that we see across the world. We've never been more unified. And even though sometimes it feels between religious, non-religious, and right and left, that's not the case. It really is the case. We don't agree on how to do it. That's fine, because one Jew and three opinions. But the fact that we all want the best for Jewish people, for Israel, is a sign of absolute unity. And I don't think we've ever been here before.
That's amazing to hear. Yeah, I mean, the message of Jewish unity, it's something at AJA we push daily, all the time, despite strong opposition. So it's great to hear that. And yeah, the podcast you mentioned, David Schulberg, is a good friend of AJA, so it's very good. Wanted to ask you about, I mentioned you took on CNN, so some people might be familiar with what happened. For those not familiar, could you tell us what the issue was and what happened?
Yes, I had three interactions with CNN. One was with Christina McFarlane, who interviewed me a couple of weeks after the tragedy. And after going through all the details of it with me, at the end of it, she said, thank you, Rabbi Dee. And now we're going to go to a Palestinian who's in exactly the same situation as Rabbi Dee from the other side. And given that there has not been a Jewish terrorist who has murdered three members of one Palestinian family for about 30 years, it was inaccurate, misleading, and really sort of aggressive towards creating a sort of moral equivalence between my plight and that of the family of the terrorist. This continued when Christina, also Aminpour, then a couple of weeks later was interviewing the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. And she said to him, she talked about the shootout that occurred with my family, which effectively accused Lucy, my wife, and my 15-year-old daughter, Rina, and my 20-year-old daughter, Maia, of attacking the terrorists and effectively being terrorists themselves, and this being a sort of fair fight out between two factions. That was the second inaccuracy. And the third came when the head of the bureau called me privately to apologize and make sure I'd got the official apology, which presumably the lawyers had forced him to write. And in that conversation, he basically drew a moral equivalence between my plight and that of the terrorist's mother. And so I think Oscar Wilde said, to lose one parent is unfortunate, to lose two is downright careless. I would take that and say to insult a victim once is unfortunate, to do it twice is downright careless, and to do it three times is complete evil. And I think that I then wrote a letter to the Jerusalem Post, open letter to the CEO of Warner Brothers that now owns CNN. And I talked about two Josephs. I said there's Joseph Goebbels, who was the mouthpiece of the Nazi regime. And there's Joseph the Tzaddik, the righteous, who was the son of Jacob, who basically prevented the whole Egyptian people from becoming slaves when they requested it at the time of the famine. And I said, David, you can choose between one or the other, because the implication, of course, is that there is a particular outlet, I won't name it, that is the voice piece of terror in the Middle East, supports terror, and basically creates a moral equivalence between terror victims and terrorists, and encourages, I suppose, if one wanted to be a terrorist and knows that one's going to get support from certain media outlets, then that is an encouragement towards that. So these are the sort of evil that I am trying to eliminate, and I feel like being thrust into this particular situation. So we're launching the case as we speak. We're just going through a lot of back videos of CNN in order to work out what the best evidence and data is from past felonies of the company.
Well, you're doing an amazing job there, and yeah, I think everyone here is familiar with just how bad CNN is, and we have the same issue with our ABC. So it's great to see you taking it on. And
I think the astonishing thing, maybe for me, but maybe for many people, is how the world experts in every aspect that one would need in order to do this have raised their hand and said, "Can we help?" So I don't think there's any shortage of support, Baruch Hashem, from the Jewish world and beyond, actually, to try and get justice from CNN and so forth. That's
really heartwarming to hear. That's excellent. I wanted to ask, you made the courageous decision. You donated the organs of your wife, Lucy. You saved five people's lives. Was it a hard decision? And can you tell us anything about what happened afterwards?
So Lucy and I had conversation about this 6 months before. I can't say how many strange coincidences, but I don't believe in coincidences. We had as a family running up to this and following it, just strange stories that have happened to me. But one of the things was we discussed this and agreed that we both would give our limbs. However, we didn't want to carry a donor card because we felt that if we were in Britain or another country and we had a donor card, they wouldn't necessarily respect the Jewish law, and they might switch off the machine before it was timely. And so when this happened, it was, again, quite an unusual situation. Lucy received 2 bullets, one in her brainstem and one in her upper spine. And whilst they, again, coincidence, you could say, or, however you want to describe it. The next car that drove down the street after her was two doctors, one of whom knew how to perform I don't know what they call it when they put a pipe into the tracheotomy, which he did with a pen because he didn't have the equipment. The next car that came along was not an ambulance, but somebody with a doctor who had a medical kit and a professional tube for tracheotomy. So they were able to perform whatever preparation they needed in order to keep her alive. And then they airlifted her to Hadassah in Kerem. And because of all those strange coincidences, Mina Shamayim, I guess, she was, every one of her organs was in perfect condition for transplants. And sadly, she was completely brain dead when they inspected her because of the bullet in her brainstem. So according to every halachic opinion, there was no obstacle to performing that. So then we had to make a decision when we were asked by the hospital, and a committee of 4, which is myself and 3 kids, made the decision. As I say, my son, who's 14, is a typical 14-year-old boy, doesn't have an opinion. And my 2 daughters, 17 and 19, are typical 17, 19-year-old girls who have very strong opinions. So they effectively made the decision, and that was the majority. And we went ahead. So that was really the whole process. I think that during the whole week or 2 of the Shiva, because it happened during Pesach, so the Shiva was delayed for a week, I was operating on adrenaline. So I don't think I really was able to think. Well, maybe I was thinking clearly, maybe just maybe more clearly than normal. But that's where we were at.
And you met the families afterwards?
So we met the families. We met at the hospital. We met 3 of the recipients. It was about 2 weeks afterwards. And I was shocked because they told us to come to the hospital, and we assumed that we'd be going bed to bed to visit them. And they sat us in the middle of a big room, and the 3 of them walked in. The lady who'd received the heart, a kid who'd received the liver, and one of the kidney recipients walked in like healthy human beings, which was absolutely astonishing. Before I went in, I asked a question from my Rav, if there's a bracha that I should say on meeting the recipients of my wife's organs, and he said you can't say Shachianu because it's not really you who's been saved here, and he suggested to me Baruch ha'oseh nes b'makom hazeh. Blessed are you, God, who made a miracle in this place. And he said, technically they should have said it, but since you're saying it, so you shouldn't say Hashem's name. And so I greeted the Mish, and I said to them, blessed is God for making a miracle in this place. And I said, you're our miracle, because the greatest comfort that could be in this situation is that you're walking and living, and that's some outcome from this terrible tragedy. And anyway, that a little bit was filmed on TV and whatever. And we met, I say, the 20-year-old boy who received the liver, who all of these guys were basically the top of the list. So they were all about, they literally had a month of life left maximum. And the grandparents of the boy came up to me, and the grandfather said, Rabbi Dee, you didn't just save my grandson today. He said, you saved myself and my wife, because we couldn't have survived. So we figured that giving organ donations is a different level to donating a building or something else, or a gadget. When you help save someone's life, the implications, for the wider family, for friends, is just immense. And one of the strange things that happened was, a couple of weeks later, we got a call from the Daily Mail, 2 Daily Mail journalists who said they were sitting in the middle of the coronation of King Charles, in the middle of the street in London, And they said, the moment this is finished, we want to fly out to Efrat and interview your two daughters. And we get, by the way, we'll pay them a decent, fee, whatever. I thought, why is this? Turns out, by the way, Daily Mail is the largest English language website for news in the world with 350 million weekly views, apparently. They came out, they interviewed Tali and Karen. And the reason was that the picture of them listening to Lucy's heart in the body of Lital was the only picture like that that's gone viral in the history of mankind. Apparently in Israel, it's not unusual to do this, but it never really gets any coverage outside of Israel. But in other countries, because of patient confidentiality, they don't introduce the patient to the donors. But in Israel, all the patients said to us when they got the call, the day after or the day of this tragedy or the day after, they all knew exactly where it was coming from anyway. So there was no point in anyone keeping it a secret because they would have known in any case. That's the Am Yisrael. That's the level of unity and connection we have. So the extra dimension to this was that they wrote a huge article about this, and that went viral. And I think that not only as we know that there's been a huge uptake in donor cards in Israel, but I think that this has probably had a big impact across the world. And one of the things that shocked me, and I think the girls talked about it, was when you donate organs, you think you're doing something which is altruistic, and you'll never get, it's not in any way going to come back to you. And yet it came back to us 1,000 times in terms of comfort and being able to meet the recipients and knowing that these people were living because of Lucy. So I think that was a shock to us and probably a shock to most people who hadn't considered that extra dimension of being an organ donor.
Incredible story. Yeah. And one of the recipients was an Arab lady as well.
So that in itself is a story. In fact, I have a friend who's a BBC journalist, also writes the Mirror newspaper, which is renownedly anti-Israel. And he offered to come over to film the meeting with the Arab recipient, who up to that point had been not willing to come forward in front of the cameras, hadn't attended the previous meeting. So it's a long story, not perhaps for a public forum like this, but we basically drove up to Nazareth and knocked on his door. And Paul and I walked in, and Paul, sat there with his camera, took pictures and videos, and the story went a couple of days later into the Mirror newspaper, which is the largest left-wing socialist, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist paper in England, and talking about how Jews are saving lives of Arabs in Israel. And he took, some other footage that might appear in other places in the future as well. So I think again, some good has come out of this tragedy.
Incredible. I wanted to ask you, a few weeks ago, you said to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that there's no need to pretend that there's a two-state solution. What did you mean by that statement?
Right. So the Palestinian Authority, if you look at it, is a second state, effectively. It has its army, which is called Fatah, and it runs multiple cities in the West Bank and the space between them. It's funded by about $1.2 billion of taxpayers' money, mostly American, European, British, I'm sure Australia contributes through to UNRWA. UNRWA basically supplies the Palestinian Authority with funds for education. Now, education includes textbooks that glorify terrorists, and summer camps that train kids to murder Jews all over the world, and epithets about taking over the country, killing every Jew. In fact, there's a film coming out in next week, which maybe we can, if you chase me, you'll get hold of through David Badin, if you know him. He's putting out a new film revealing a lot of these things that are going on. And the Palestinian Authority is also responsible for about 70% of terror attacks in against Israeli citizens through Fatah and through their other Al-Aqsa brigades and other minions. The terrorists who killed my wife and daughters were from an UNRWA camp, educated by UNRWA and Palestinian Authority. And we have this very strange situation that the Western world is funding terror supported by the government of Israel, and the Palestinian Authority is supported by the Israeli Defense Forces. So it's, somebody described it to me as Chelm. It really is Chelm here. I think if you ask Bibi why he's doing it, he would say because it's the best alternative, but that's clearly not the case. I mean, when this happened, I came out and said, people said to me, "Do you hate Arabs?" And I said to them, "Look, the two guys who killed my wife and daughters were 5'10" with brown hair, male Arab terrorists. I said, do I have to hate everyone who's 5'10"? Do I have to hate every man? Do I have to hate every Arab? Or do I just have to hate every terrorist? And I think that, one has to distinguish here between terrorists and others. And part of the problem in this region has been a sort of sweeping statements which muddy the waters and allow these type of things to continue. So I think until we start calling a spade, we're not going to make any progress. So we need to identify where the terror is coming from, which is the Palestinian Authority. We need to stop funding it. We need to demand at least that they repeal their pay for slay, because out of that $1.2 billion of funding, 300 million or more is going to pay people like the family of the guys who killed my wife and daughters. And that is known to all those who are funding it. In my opinion, we could probably do much better by creating a different structure in the West Bank, which would be better for us and a lot better for the Palestinian people, who mostly are decent people trying to work and earn a good living in Israel, mostly. And they are appalled by what's going on, both by their own terrorists and by the international community that's funding the terrorists that are threatening their lives as much as ours. So we're in a very strange situation, but we need to understand where we are before we can change it.
You're correct in that Australia, ADA had some big successes in getting Australian money going to terrorism reduced, but the new government, relatively new government we have here, has just doubled funding they're sending to UNRWA. So we do have a struggle on our hands. They know it's going towards bad causes. They don't seem to care, but it's something we need to work on. And I think it's also timely. Today's also the 18th anniversary of the disengagement from Gaza, which led to, years of rockets and terrorism. So it's very relevant politically. I wanted to ask you.
Robert, I just saw, before you ask the next question, somebody just asked a question on the chat, whether I've had any contact with the EU. So funnily enough, I got a call from the EU Commissioner for Human Rights a couple of months ago, and he was in the King David Hotel, and his secretary called me and said, "Will you come meet him?" So I said, with pleasure. And I met also the EU ambassador to Israel, which I didn't know existed, but apparently, as well as having German, French, Italian, there's also an EU ambassador to Israel. I said to the EU ambassador, I said to him, why is there an EU ambassador to Israel? He said, well, because of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And he said, because we're the biggest trading partner of Israel. So I said, tell me something, is there really an Israel-Palestinian conflict? I mean, I said, how many people were killed in the last year, in this conflict? So 50 or so. So I said, okay, how many people were killed in Syria in the last year? He said, well, in the last 10 years, 500,000. So I said, oh, is there an EU ambassador to Syria? He said, no. I said, why not? He said, too dangerous. So I said, okay, in Syria, where there's really a conflict and 500,000 people have been killed, I said, there's no EU, but here where there's an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and by the way, this is something which I discovered when the CNN cameraman came to my house to film me. I said to him, I thought I'd schmooze him a bit, which didn't help. I said to him, where do you live? He said, Tel Aviv. I said, what, how come? He said, because my kids are at school, English-speaking school, and because my, it's a great place to live, and we're by the beach. And I didn't say to him, why don't you live in Damascus? Why don't you live in Gaza? Why don't you live in Ramallah? Why don't you live in Tehran? Right? And the reality we have here is that we are the only democracy in the Middle East. And we're surrounded by 22 Arab states, 200 million Arabs who are living in countries with no human rights at all. And all the politicians, the ambassadors who choose to be in Tel Aviv and not in our capital city, which is insulting, and the journalists all choose to live here in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv because it's a nice place to live and it's a safe place to live. And they come here and accuse us of every evil under the sun, whilst all the other people around us are committing far more terrible crimes, but nobody wants to be there because it's too dangerous, and they're only here because it's safe. So we're in this another helm, which is that because we are so free and have such great human rights for us and for Arabs, we're the ones that's accused of not having freedom and rights for Arabs. So one of the things I did, the person who asked the question may be interested. At the beginning of this tragedy, about the week after the Shiva, somebody contacted me and said, "I'd like to help you in any way." My name is Yishai, GIS Systems. So I happen to know that GIS Systems are the people who make maps. So I said, "Yishai, can you do me a favor? Make me a map which is color-coded, free, not free, by country. Okay, based on Freedom House scores. Freedom House, I worked in human rights for a while, is the industry standard for measuring human rights in the world, used by Greenpeace and Amnesty International, so it's definitely not right-wing. And let's see what it looks like. Well, surprise, surprise, you get a map. There's a little green dot, which is Israel, and there's a sea of red, because everyone else is red. And if you blow up Israel to be a big size, you get Palestinian Authority and Gaza red in the middle of Israel, which means that you have 200 million Arabs in the Middle East who live in non-free countries with no human rights. And there's 2 million Arabs who have human rights. And they're the 2 million Israeli Arab citizens who have human rights. So that is the reality. Anyway, so I took this map, I framed it, and I gave a copy, one to Gilmore, who's the European Commissioner for Human Rights, and one for the European EU ambassador. And the moment I gave it to them, they could not take their eyes off it because they knew it was true, but no one had ever presented this to them, and they say that Israel is the only country with democracy and human rights for Arabs, not only for Jews, in the Middle East. So, when you show that map to people, then they complain. What about the occupation? Yeah, you know what the occupation is? The occupation is the Palestinian Authority is occupying the Palestinians. And if you ask Palestinians, if you ask them privately, that's what they'll tell you. The greater occupation is the Palestinian Authority occupying us much more than the Israelis. The Israelis, they're working in Israel. They're getting very, very good salaries from working in Israel. Palestinian Authority is stealing their money. It's intimidating them. It's giving them no freedom of speech, no freedom of religion, no freedom of anything. And they're scared of them driving right down their streets and shooting them. And that is that is basically the situation of the Palestinian Authority. So this was an eye-opener apparently to Mr. Gilmore and Dimitar, who are the EU leaders in Israel.
Wow, it sounds like all Israel needs to do is make conditions for journalists a bit less cushy, and they won't get so much negative reporting.
I have suggested to people that if a CNN journalist were to do this, that one should perhaps drive them in an army truck to the border with Syria, open the gate, push them through, and say thank you very much, make your own way home. but I'm not sure that everybody would agree with that.
Amazing. Do you have a message for the Australian government? Basically, last week it declared that a lot of areas of Israel, Judea, Samaria, including the Kotel, Har Bayit, are illegally occupied Palestinian territory. What do you have to say to them about that?
I would say to them, I think a lot of Australia is illegally occupied Aboriginal territory. So can they answer that first, please?
Yeah,
I think we have prior rights to the country. I'm not sure that they have the same documented prior rights. I can show them a copy of the Bible, which they probably have in each of their homes. And strangely enough, there were 3 places that were purchased in the Tanakh. That one is Har Bayit by David HaMelech. One was Shechem, which is the place of where Joseph was buried, and one is
Hebron.
One is, of course, the Hebron, right, the Marat Machpelah, the Cave of the Patriarchs, which was in the Torah itself. And those are the three places which are most in dispute, the ones which, apparently God decided it would be worth writing down for perpetuity in a book that every religion in the world in the future would accept as truth, except for those three purchases, apparently, which is fascinating. So maybe point your Australian government to their Bible and see whether they believe in God, because these people, must be God-fearing.
Yeah, you'd hope so. I'm not so sure that they are, but David, would you like to ask a question?
Sure. Seeing we're talking about the Australian government a bit, Rabbi Dee, there is a related policy that is being considered, and that is the possibility that the new Australian Labor government would give recognition to a state of Palestine, whatever that is. Could you comment on whether you think that would be helpful or unhelpful?
I would say that it's the most regressive policy that I've ever heard, because if they were intelligent, which sounds like they're not, they would look at the research currently done on Palestinians that shows the majority of Palestinians, they do not support a two-state solution. Not to mention the majority of Israelis, not to mention the Americans, Europeans, and British foreign ministers, many of whom I've spoken to in this process, who've all said to me privately, I don't know if they've said publicly, there is no two-state solution. So Australia, I'm afraid to say, is not necessarily what I would call a world power or influence. But if they're flogging this dead horse, they're just showing how out of touch they are with the reality on the ground. And they should look at their facts and perhaps speak to the Palestinians before they start creating more damage, because the greatest damage that was done to the Palestinian people was actually done by the Americans at Camp David by creating this ridiculous structure whereby, again, this was an eye-opener to me living in Efrat in the territories. But my Arab friends tell me that, before Camp David, Oslo, they could actually go into Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, all around the country. They had freedom of movement. There was complete freedom for everybody. There was no borders, and life was very good. And the Israelis were controlling the roads and controlling the education, controlling the hospitals, and everything was working like clockwork. So the moment that these Americans, created this sort of colonialist type of structure, and of course the Australian government, dare I say, it has this colonial mindset that you need to have, nation state and so forth. They basically mucked everything up, and they really ruined the lives of many Palestinians who really would mostly prefer to return to, a one-state solution, which of course is not possible for Israel because we don't want another 2.5 million voters in the Knesset. But there are solutions on the table, I can tell you at the moment, which are much closer to that, give the Palestinian people much more freedom, and are not a sort of traditional two-state solution. So if the Australian government would like to speak to me about it, I'm happy to educate them, and maybe I could bring them up to speed with what's really happening here, because and maybe introduce them to some Palestinians so they could speak to find out about the truth as well, because they obviously don't have any Arab friends who they're speaking to.
Rabbi Dee, I think we've got a similar issue with some of our Jewish organisations, frankly, because AJA is probably an outlier in that we say also that there is no two-state solution, but other Jewish organisations have it as their policy that there should be a two-state solution. So it's not just the government; it's a good part of the representatives, let me put it that way.
Let me tell you, the people I know in Israel who support two-state solution are typically very liberal, Tel Avivian, sort of non-religious people, and the motivation, I can tell you, is they would like to build a very big wall between us and the Palestinians and cut them off completely, never see one ever again. And if they have any troubles, lop over a few missiles and bomb them to pieces. Which, of course, we sort of didn't work with Gaza, and you said the anniversary of that. It didn't work with Gaza, And it certainly wouldn't work with Palestine, with the West Bank, because it's so close to Tel Aviv, which of course they care about. It's a very stupid policy, and it's actually driven by racism, not by anything else. It's driven by the fact that these people don't want to have anything to do with a Palestinian or an Arab, which interestingly is not the case for people like myself and my friends who live in these territories and work and live and shop next to Palestinian Arabs all the time. We don't have any racist feelings against these people. We have security issues, but we have many friends, and you find settlers have more Arab friends per family than anyone in the rest of the country, because we live with them. So, sadly, I'm talking from a little bit of a position of knowledge, and your friends in these other organizations are talking from a position of complete ignorance. And I suggest they maybe come and spend a week or two in a frat, or in Alan Mamre, or the Shomron, or in Judea, and the experience actually to meet some Arabs, and maybe meet some of the hundreds of thousands of Arabs who are working in the West Bank, as they call it, or in Israel, and see what they say about their feelings towards Israel and two-state solutions. Because the 200,000 Arabs who are working every day in Israel or in the settlements are very, very happy with Israel, and very, very unhappy with the Palestinian Authority. And by the way, an average family, let's say, has 3 kids. So that's 200,000 people working every day in Israel represents times 5 the number of people who are being supported by that salary. That's 1 million people. That's half the population of the Palestinian Authority, of the Palestinian territories, is earning their main salary from Israel. That salary is more than twice the salary of what people are earning inside Palestinian Authority. So you don't have to be a mathematician to work out that about 60-70% of the money in the Palestinian Authority is coming from us. And then, of course, the jobs of those people who are working in the Palestinian Authority is heavily paid for by those people, because all the shops and everything depends on them. 90% of exports from Palestinian authorities to Israel. So you get to figure about 70 or 80% of the whole economy of the Palestinian Authority is now dependent on Israel. And that's a very good number, because it means that a lot of people now want peace with Israel, and they want peaceful existence with Israelis. And yes, there's a small number of terrorists who are mostly in UNRWA camps, funded by all our governments and protected by the IDF. But actually, the vast majority, thanks to Bibi and his policies over the last 20 years, are now working and earning their money from us. And therefore, the reality on the ground is totally different from what it was 20 years ago, when that was 20%, and there was a two-state solution in theory. Now there is no two-state solution, because everybody is dependent on us. So you have to think of a new solution. Again, Mr. Bibi, and also Australian government and all your friends in these other organizations, because the economic reality has changed dramatically thanks to good right-wing economic policy over the past 20 years.
Well, we've had a comment from Lana in the chat who backs up everything you say. She says, when I was in Tel Aviv, I met Palestinian construction workers as we were escaping the rain under an awning. They told me they crossed the border every day to support their large families. They were very friendly to me and did not seem resentful or bitter. So yeah, it sounds like Bibi's policy.
I'll tell you, look, an Arab Palestinian who's working in Tel Aviv is earning 7,000, maybe more shekels a month. And his friend in the territories earns 2,500. The one, if he stays at home, he's earning 2,500. And by the way, a doctor in the Palestinian Authority is earning 2,500 shekels a month. And a laborer in Tel Aviv is earning 7,000 shekels a month. So one of the problems that my Palestinian friends had after COVID was their kids couldn't go back to school, because a lot of the teachers have become laborers and were getting paid more than twice by being builders than they were as teachers. So frankly, they said, no, we're not going to teach. So the kids were stuck at home for an extra few months till they don't know how they sorted that one out. So yeah, that's the reality. But I say, you guys are interested in the facts. Unfortunately, there are many people who are not. So
yeah, okay. I'm going to do our 1-minute promotion, which we do in the middle, and as we do each week. And that is that at the end of the event, if you're not yet engaged in some way with AJA, go to the website jewishassociation.org.au, where you can apply for membership. We do need donations. Make sure you've joined the email list so you get notifications. And just next week, we're actually focusing on what's regarded as the most significant existential threat to Israel, which is Iran, with the guest Dr. Eric Mandel, who's the founder of the Middle East Political Information Network, very much involved in security issues, and he's also the senior security editor for the Jerusalem Post. And I do want to show you one image before we invite questions, and those of you who want to ask questions, now's a good time to put up your hand. Robert alluded to that we had worked very hard at getting reform through Australia in the way foreign aid is handled. And this image made a huge impact. It's a cover story for The Spectator magazine, which is possibly Australia's leading political magazine. And as you can see, there's a man with a kippah on his head and a Magen David lying face down in a pool of blood, and stabbed into his back is an Australian $100 note. That has gone to many of our politicians in the previous government, and it was part of a multi-pronged strategy to get the government to stop giving cash to the Palestinian Authority and also to reduce funding to UNRWA. We're very proud of those achievements, but they are being reversed at the moment by the new government. We have a couple of questions. First,
before that, you mentioned that you've got the speaker next week talking about
Iran,
Israel and Iran. I just want to say that we can dedicate this to the Refuah Shalema of Binyamin ben Sila, and I'll explain why. Because there's one man who is standing in between Iran and a nuclear bomb, which will attack both America, Europe, Britain, maybe Australia eventually. And that is Bibi Netanyahu, and he recently had a heart attack, although I think they called it something less. I think that the whole world should be looking to him and praying for his good health, because if anyone can defeat Iran, it will be Bibi. And I think that's the reason he's staying in power, to fight that fight. And I think left-wing, right-wing, Christian, Muslim, American, Chinese, British or French, everyone should be praying, and probably are secretly praying, for his good health over the coming few months as he fights the fight on behalf of humanity. So that's my Refuah Shalema for Binyamin ben Sila.
Amen. Okay. All right, let's go to some questions. Mr. Trabish, I think you're first. Would you like to unmute?
My sincere condolences for your tragedy. And as a result of that, you've now received a lot of world exposure, and somebody like the European foreign minister, whatever he may be, reached out to you. When these tragedies that happen, like your tragedy, it seems to me that people try to react to it and say, well, this is not appropriate. And they're trying to sort of give an even-handed reaction to it, rather than coming out and condemning it in the strongest of terms. And I'm assuming that if these were condemned in the strongest of terms, and you don't give the Palestinians a free pass, it may make a bit of a difference for them, because they need to get positive news constantly. And if they get condemnation, unequivocal condemnation, even from a nation that believes in a two-state solution, it should, I would assume, make some impact on the Palestinian leadership.
Yes, I agree with you, but what do you do when CNN is going out applauding what happened, accusing my family of being terrorists, and interviewing the mother of the terrorists, showing her in tears, and condemning Israelis and Israel? So I think that's, stage one, is to take CNN to court and to show their hypocrisy. And I call it evil, because what I said was, at one point, was that if the murderers themselves were ignorant, brought up in an UNRWA camp, educated by Aussie dollars and other money, to hate, taught by their parents and their imams to hate, and they basically acted like robots and killed. I said, but you can't say that about CNN, because the CNN journalists are Ivy League educated. They're not misinformed. They're the most well-informed people on the planet as far as what's going on in Israel. They should be, because they've got a big team of professionals, and therefore you can only say that they're evil because they're doing this intentionally to mislead people. And why are they doing that to mislead people? Well, I don't know why, but what's the impact? The impact is they're supporting the terrorists for future terror attacks. And when they said to me, Rabbi Dee, what do you think about the cycle of violence? The cycle of violence is going on. I said, there's only one cycle of violence, which is supported by the media. I said, when there's a terror attack and it's not condemned appropriately by the media, I didn't say like you, but I think hopefully it was obvious, then basically that encourages the terrorists to perform the next terror attack, and that will go on and on. So, when the media stops supporting terror, we will stop this cycle of violence. So I agree with you, but I think that's it's not we need to attack the media at this point. I think that's my view.
Terry, you're next. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, thank you for your talk. And like the previous questioner, our condolences. We have a very deep sympathy. One thing that you did say was about the two-state solution, and it's always struck me that the people who we really have to persuade outside of Israel that there is no two-state solution are our friends. There are an awful lot of politicians in this country that basically default to we condemn the violence, but we support the two-state solution. Is there any movement within Israel to start challenging that narrative, because it's clearly never going to happen?
Let me answer it slightly differently. I don't believe that there is any solution, and I think this is factual and obvious, that will come about by normal process, in the sense that if you had to convince America and Europe and Britain and Israelis, left and right, and Palestinians and Saudis, and there's no solution, because there's no one solution that will appeal to all those parties. And we've been discussing it for 50 years, and we'll be discussing it for another 50 years or 500 years. That to me is clear. However, I don't believe that change occurs in a linear fashion. My life has changed dramatically in a non-linear fashion, and I believe that is the nature of reality. So I think that with the right plan on the table that works for the two parties at stake, which are basically the settlers and the Palestinians, that could come to fruition against the will of everybody else, if there was a moment in time in the future where there was a need for something to happen. So let me put it that way. So I think that there will be a non-linear solution that will happen, and you can't predict when, because these things will happen at an unforeseen moment. But if the right plan was on the table, that was, and there are plans which can appeal to both us and them, and we can live quite happily in peace, but they wouldn't be agreed to by most other people. But if the moment comes, that then it could happen. And I think that's the thing to be optimistic about. And I think there are many potential dislocation moments where this could easily happen in the next year or two. So watch this space.
Someone's asked a written question. Are you optimistic about peace with the Saudis and building on the Abraham Accords? Do you think there'll be developments there?
I'm not. Yeah, I'm nervous. I hope everyone's nervous about peace with the Saudis if it comes with them getting a nuclear weapon. So I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't know very much about what's being discussed, and I don't know what the real risks are. But it strikes me that in the same way that America gave $1 trillion worth of weapons to Afghanistan when they left, that and they ended up giving weapons to Iran and Iraq and technology. Do we really want to be giving weapons to the Saudis? do we really know who they are well enough to trust them with nuclear weapons? That's
all right. Morris Klein, would you like to ask your question?
No, you're still muted, Morris. You need to unmute. Okay.
Shalom, Rabbi Dee. Is there any further news on you becoming an international envoy for Israel to the diaspora?
We're negotiating at the moment, so wait and see if they agree to my terms. The first thing that they asked was for me to be full-time, to which I said, or not necessarily full-time, but an employee of the Foreign Office, to which I said, does that mean that I can't say what I want to say? They said, correct. I said, so that's not going to work. So they came back a week later and said, you could be freelance, which means that when you're working with us, then when you're speaking to someone we put you in front of, you can say what we want you to say. And when you're not, you can say what you like to say. So I said, that would work. So we're gradually, hopefully, coming to an agreement.
No, it's a work in progress still.
Work in progress, yeah.
Well, hopefully it all gets approved, and we'd love to have you visit here. Hopefully it'll be a first.
I see Debbie's statement, but media likes to make money, and they continue to do whatever makes money. I just want to add to that I think I coined a new phrase, which is anti-truth, because what CNN does, and as you know, many of the other reporting media on Israel, is not actually lying, because lying in Hebrew it's clear. Sheker means a little piece of the truth, and emet is the whole truth, right? So a lie is generally a little bit of piece of the truth, where you focus in on something and you blow it out of proportion and you create something out of it. What CNN does is portray the victim as the perpetrator, which is actually inverting the truth, for which there is no word in Hebrew. And I don't think there was a word in English, because, to actually take the actual truth and to flip it over 100% is not. So you say the Christian community is with you. Yes, the word anti-truth probably came from a Christian concept, but it's the opposite to truth. And I think it's a word we should start using a bit more when we're referring to the reporting that goes on in Israel.
Rabbi, you're very good at reading the chat questions. Usually they don't always get read, but it's good you keep on top of it. Let's go the next question to Hugh. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, Rabbi Dee. My wife and I were actually in England, and we both were deeply, deeply shocked what happened to your wife and two daughters. But I just wanted to ask you, we're both Christians and we're both Zionists. The question I've got really is, do you believe that Israel exercising sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, and particularly Area C in the Jordan Valley, do you believe that that is really a priority? Because, I mean, it's something we pray for.
Yes, I think as part of a peace agreement, I call it Shalom agreement, by the way, rather than peace agreement, because peace comes from the Latin pax, which means absence of war. And Shalom comes from the Hebrew shlemut, which means completeness, which means a complete solution. So we're not really interested in a peace solution. We've had peace solutions with the Gazans for the last 10 years, and they attack us in between the peace, we have war. So that's not Shalom. Shalom is, we solve the problem and everyone's happy. So yes, I do believe that the Shalom agreement will include the Israel taking control back of all of most of that territory, but it will come hand in hand with the Palestinians getting a number of rights as well. So I think yes, you can certainly continue praying for that, and I think it may be on its way, hopefully.
Definitely hope so.
Now, how important is the upcoming US presidential election from an Israeli perspective?
Interesting. Yes, I mean, I think you're right. I don't really know. I know as much as you know probably about this, or maybe less, but I would say that obviously, a friend in the White House is a good thing. It depends who it is. Some of these friends are better at talking than actually delivering. So, that doesn't necessarily mean very much. I'll tell you something strange, to give credit, Hakarat HaTov, to Biden, which might sound like an unusual thing to do, but I was told by one of my close friends that whilst the Republican government stopped funding UNRWA, it didn't have any impact at all, because they actually withdrew the funds, and the rest of the countries in the world made up the difference. And so the UNRWA got the same funding as it would have got before. But because the Biden administration did not withdraw the funds, but actually put them into escrow, and so they're sitting in a bank account. Apparently they're not being paid until certain conditions are met, and they're sitting in a bank account. Because of that, the funds have not been made up by other parties, and therefore they're receiving less money than they would have. So I'm saying things are never quite as clear as you might expect. And your friend might be your enemy, and your enemy might be your friend. And sometimes they just have policy muck up, which creates a result which is not intended, which is also possible.
Very cute.
Yeah, Shem works in mysterious ways. We've got a written question here from Ron, and he asks how you deal with the situation where certain right-wing parties in Europe, they support pro-Israel policies, like, for example, defunding UNRWA and supporting Israel in general, but the local Jewish communities there don't want to have anything to do with them for other reasons. How do you feel about these parties?
Very good question. I personally believe that Israel should take its support from wherever it can get it, and it should be spending money trying to get those Jews out of those regimes as soon as possible, because we saw what happened when those type of regimes took over Europe 80 years ago, and they're probably much safer being not there.
I think that's some very good advice. I wanted to ask you, Rabbi, we might just put close to time, but I wanted to ask you, how you've become a very public figure now. What's the best way for people to keep up with you? Are you big on social media? Do you have an email?
I have a Facebook group, I think it's Rabbi Leo Dee. So that's probably the best thing. I started a Twitter thing, but I don't know how to use it, so I probably won't use it. So that's probably the best thing to do. But yeah, I'm not very good at public media, but I do hope there'll be an article in the Jerusalem Post coming out this Friday in English, and the same article I'm hoping to get into Haaretz in Hebrew. I think probably if I did, it might be one of the first times ever that's happened, but we'll see if it gets in there.
Well, that'd be a good education for Haaretz, and I mean, we'll definitely share the Jerusalem Post article with our email subscribers and on our social media. We'll keep an eye out for it. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, Rabbi. We wish you long life. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And just before we go, the L'chaim show with Morris Klein, it's going to be on now on 3ZZZ. So, Rabbi, once more, David, did you want to thank Rabbi Dee for joining us?
All good. We hope that when you come to Australia in the not too distant future, it will be in a freelance capacity, please.
Thank you. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thanks. And don't forget, everyone, you can keep up to date with what AJ is talking about. You can join our free email list at jewishassociation.org.au. As well, we're very active on all the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it. For now, we wish everyone a very good night. We look forward to seeing you next week with another important topic about the growing threats from Iran. So thanks, everyone. Have a good night.